Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Jordan and welcome to today's video, which is an Aardvark reading vlog that has been a very long time coming. I have been holding on to some of these books for many months and I'm so excited to finally knock them off of my TBR and let you know if I think they are worth reading. Really quickly, in case you're not familiar with Aardvark, they are a book subscription service really similar to Book of the Month, where they have 5 or 6 monthly picks every month. You get to pick one with your subscription to add to your box and have shipped to you every month. And I have really enjoyed being a member. I am not sponsored by Aardvark. I do have a referral code that I think might get you a discount on your first box. And if you use that, then it gives me a very small commission off of it. But I do pay for my own membership every month. And I've really enjoyed exploring their picks, getting to know some of the books that they offer. And for me, I really like going to them for books in the sci-fi genre, which you will definitely see with the books that I'm reading for this video. So let's get into them. So the first book that I will be reading is called Death of the Author by Nnedi Okorafor. This is a sci-fi book that has to do with an author who writes a dystopian sci-fi type book that features some interesting technological advancements that then start kind of happening in real life. Not an author that I have ever read from before, but excited to give this one a try. Then I will be reading Dissolution by Nicholas Binge. This is also a sci-fi book that has to do with like memory, sort of time travel type stuff. Very similar to Blake Crouch, and I have read from Nicholas Binge once before. He, I think, only has one other book out called Ascension, and I did read that one, I think also through Aardvark. I did not enjoy it, but I'm excited to give him another try because this type of sci-fi book is so up my alley. Then we've got kind of a buzzy book that I'm excited to give a try, Immaculate Conception by Ling Huang. This is the author of Natural Beauty, which was a literary sci-fi horror book is what I got the vibes of with that one. I never did read it, but I saw a lot of hype around it. Same is true for this one so far. I'm seeing a lot of people picking it up, and it also is in that kind of literary sci-fi with some horror elements to it type of genre blend situation. And this one specifically has to do with art, being in the art world, and in the slightly futuristic but also right now situation where AI is encroaching into the art space. So very interesting commentary to be explored in here. Then we've got a book that's a pretty firm sci-fi horror split, and it's American Rapture by CJ Lead, another author who wrote a book that I heard a lot about, Mayfly, but never myself read. And this one, in addition to being a sci-fi horror split, also has very strong religious themes to it. So I'm excited to give this one a try and see if it happens to work for me. That feels a little outside of my comfort zone, but the plot of this book and the reviews I've seen for it make it sound like it could work for me. Then we've got another kind of literary sci-fi called The Strange Case of Jane O by Karen Thompson Walker. This is about a woman who goes to see a therapist. She's having these weird dissociative episodes and he's trying to get to the bottom of them. And last but not least, the 6th book that I will be reading in this video is Juny by Erin Crosby Eckstein. This one is the only one that's not a sci-fi. This is a historical fiction book. It does have a speculative element to it, so not sci-fi, but in that kind of fantasy, magical realism type of realm. But again, not sci-fi, not technological in nature, because this one is set in the 1850s and follows a main character who is a young enslaved girl. So all of those 6 books I will be reading in this video. If they sound interesting to you, you want to hear more about them, stay tuned. I'm going to get to reading and I'll pop back in whenever I have some reading updates, giving you a little bit more in depth of a synopsis and of course my final reviews for each of these books. Okay, my friends, I am here with a very exciting update. I have finished 2 books for this vlog, and I'm going to talk about them out of order because I want to talk about the book that I just finished that I'm so excited to talk about first. So the book that I just finished reading, actually I finished it yesterday. I read it within one day. I absolutely flew through it. It's Dissolution by Nicholas Binge. I am so excited that I loved this book. This author wrote another book called Ascension, which I think I unhauled because that is a book that I did not enjoy. It was a sci-fi book that went way over my head. It was really confusing to me. I think it was trying to do a little too much, but it had inklings of a book that I could love. So I was really looking forward to whatever this author wrote next, and it's this book, Dissolution. And I'm so excited that I gave him another try because this was 5 stars. This book was so perfect for me, and I'm going to explain it, and it's probably going to make it so clear why I loved it. But on the other hand, I did go into this book actually not really knowing anything about it, and I think that served me well. So I'm going to be a little bit careful in talking about this book because I definitely don't want to give too much away, but I'm going to talk about some comp titles that I think will really strongly give the vibe and will make it clear who I would recommend this book to. So before I get to those, talking about the book itself, all I really want to say about this book and the plot is that this book opens in interview format, and we're getting the interview of this woman named Maggie. And we're starting this book, she has basically no memory of what has happened to her in the last, I don't know, however many days or weeks or whatever. Like, she wakes up in this strange environment. She doesn't know how she got there. She doesn't know why she's being interviewed. And part of how this book kicks off is the guy that she's talking to gives her this pill that basically lets her go back and relive some of her most recent memories. And he is interviewing her about what she's been going through lately, and that kicks off the story. That's one part of the book, and then the other part of the book is about this man who we follow him starting from when he's really young, when he's about 10 years old. We follow him through his school years, and then we find out who he is and what he does later into his life. And the book is basically about those two main characters, how their lives intersect, and this sci-fi world that they're in, and yeah, it goes from there. So as you can tell, I already spoke about how this book deals with memory. Memory in sci-fi books is something I absolutely love. The very easy comparison that I would make to this book is Recursion by Blake Crouch. This is also a memory-centered sci-fi book that kind of toes the line between sci-fi and thriller. I loved this book. I love Blake Crouch, and I think that anyone who loved this one will also like Dissolution. And especially how this book kind of makes memory stuff verge onto time travel. That also makes me want to tie Dissolution to The Other Side of Night, which is kind of a time travel-y type sci-fi book that also introduces some mystery elements. I also absolutely loved this book, gave it 5 stars. And then this book, Dissolution, also brought up a lot of memories of reading the book Moonwalking with Einstein, which is a nonfiction book about memory and about this author is a USA Memory Championship champion. Like, he's literally an expert at memory, and he walks through several different strategies that the best memory minds in the world utilize in order to build up their memory capabilities. And there are parts of this book that I still totally remember to this day. It talks about building memory palaces as a strategy to increase your memory capabilities, and that is also referenced within this book. So there were a lot of parallels there that I enjoyed making and linking together. The very last thing that I will compare to this book is a movie called The Imitation Game. That is one of my favorite movies. It stars Benedict Cumberbatch, and it's set in World War II, and it's about the main character being a genius and cracking the Enigma coding machine that the Germans used. And Dissolution has nothing to do with that, but The Imitation Game specifically shows the main character's like school age years and how that formed him to be the person he is as an adult and how that affects his life. And that whole sequence of the movie, I don't know, I just kept picturing that when I was reading Dissolution, because we get this main character back when he was in boarding school and then college, and his experiences that really shape who he becomes as an adult. So I also really enjoyed those parallels. That was a 5-star movie for me, and this was a 5-star book. I just loved everything about it. I was inhaling this book. I would say it is a generally approachable, accessible type of sci-fi book. Towards the end, it gets a little complicated, as a lot of these kind of sci-fi thrillers do. Just the web gets more and more entangled. You have to wrap your brain around a lot, but in my opinion, it brought us there in an understandable way. And even if you don't fully grasp all of these scientific concepts in here. First of all, they're fictional, so it's okay to not fully understand it, but also I feel like if you just grasp onto the characters and you're invested in them, that's more important, and that's what kind of carries you through the complicated sci-fi elements of a book like this. So I absolutely loved it. I loved learning everything about what has happened to these characters, all of their pasts, all of their interweavings. I liked the conclusion to like the sci-fi element in here and what was happening. I thought the ending was particularly great. So I loved it. This is definitely going onto my shelf as a favorite. It probably is going to end up on my favorites of the year so far. I don't know, big claim, but I just, as I was reading it, I knew, I could tell that it was going to be a favorite book. So adding it to my list along with Blake Crouch, along with Andy Weir, along with Adam Hamdy, who I mentioned earlier, as some of my favorite sci-fi authors that just write the specific type of sci-fi, kind of sci-fi thriller that really, really works for me. So if that also works for you, highly recommend this one. It is a pretty new release, so I recommend getting your hands on it and giving it a try. All right, and then the other book that I have to give an update on is one that unfortunately did not work quite as well for me. It was a little bit of a disappointment, but still glad that I read it. It's Death of the Author by Nnedi Okorafor. This is a book that I've actually been seeing quite a lot of buzz about, and it has a really high rating on Goodreads, and the premise of it sounded really up my alley. This is about our main character, who is a disabled Nigerian American woman who is kind of in this rut in her life at the very beginning of this book. She is an aspiring author, and she's written and released some literary fiction books that haven't been overly successful. Nothing has really gripped the masses or anything. And one day she's kind of in a rage with her normal life, and she sits down and she just starts writing this wild sci-fi robot book that has like AI elements, and it's this big grand like sci-fi novel, completely different from anything she's ever written. And at the very start of this book, she releases that to her publisher, and from the very beginning she knows that this book is going to take off like wildfire, and that's what it does. Again, this is early on in the book, so not really a spoiler, but what happens then throughout the rest of this book is her experience as this wildly successful sci-fi author just starts snowballing into this really crazy life situation for her, and she gets opportunities that she wouldn't have gotten otherwise. Not only like normal opportunities, but also like tech opportunities related to her and her disability. So there's a lot in here in terms of commentary, and that's what I was excited to read. You guys know that I love books that have something to say, and I feel like this book had a lot to say, and I was so excited to absorb it all. I just feel like the story itself didn't grip me as much as I was hoping. I don't know, I really liked this main character and I liked reading about what she was going through. We also got a lot of insertions of her sci-fi book. Like, there are chapters in this book from her book, and that interested me way less. I understand why it was done, especially because later in this book, realities start to merge in terms of her real life and what she wrote into her book. Like, there are some interesting parallels there, but I still wasn't all that interested in reading the chapters from her book. And this book is also pretty long. It's like over 430 pages. And I just feel like it was a little bit longer than I would have personally preferred. It dragged a little bit. It takes a lot of like detours through this main character's life that I just wasn't, I don't know, some of them I was more interested in than others. So overall, I'm landing at 3 stars for this. So it's not that I really strongly disliked it. I just didn't love it as much as I was hoping I would. I actually had a really similar experience with this book as I did with Chain Gang All-Stars. Very different plots, but very similar in that they're slightly futuristic sci-fi contemporary books that have a lot to say. And I hoped this one hit harder than it did, and I was also hoping this one would hit me harder than it did. So I'm landing at 3 stars, a little bit of a disappointment, but not to say that it's a bad book by any means. I definitely think anybody who is interested in that concept should give it a try, because on the chance that it works for you, I think it could really, really work. And like I said, it has some really great reviews on Goodreads already, so I don't want to steer it away from its potential audience, but for me, it didn't live up to my own personal hopes and expectations, which is a bummer, but still glad that I gave it a try. So that's where we're at. 2 books down, 4 to go. So I'm gonna get back to reading and I'll be back once I have my next update. Okay, my friends, I am back with 2 more reading updates. I have finished 2 more books. Which one should I start with? Let's just go in the order that I read them. So the next book that I read is Immaculate Conception by Ling Huang. I was excited to pick this book up and curious to see what I was going to think about it. This is the author of Natural Beauty, which came out, I don't know, last year, maybe the year before. And it was a very popular book when it came out. And that one I think was kind of a literary horror book about like the beauty industry and unrealistic beauty standards, things like that in a horror context. I never did give that book a try and I'm not sure what I would think about that one, but this is that author's newest release and so I've seen more buzz about this book because that one was so popular. And this one is, I guess you would say, a literary horror about the art world and also just general technology advancements. So it's kind of like a sci-fi horror and it's kind of abstract. And I really struggled with reading this book because I never really felt like I really got into it. I didn't feel like I could really sink my teeth into like a plot in this book or really firmly understanding what it was about. It's not linear. It jumps back and forth in different timelines and it follows our main character who has a best friend and they both go to art school together. They get really close and then in the more current day timeline, it's clear that they've had a falling out or they've lost touch and they're no longer as close as they were. And a lot of things transpired basically in the meantime that we kind of fill the gaps into. But just with the way this book jumped around so much, it was really hard to keep track of what was happening and like what timeline we were in and what I was supposed to be getting out of the book. And that's unfortunate because I do think a lot of the commentary in here I could have appreciated because it touches on a lot of things, including AI in art. And actually there was a scene in here when they were in art school that was really interesting to read when they were all preparing for like this showcase of their art pieces, when all of a sudden this new piece of technology dropped that was AI art related and people were copywriting the art that AI was creating. And it was happening at such a rapid pace that real artists were having to basically take down their art pieces because they were infringing upon these copyrights protecting the AI art. And it was very dystopian feeling, but so realistic to what we're experiencing today and just how unprecedented a lot of these types of topics are right now and what that means legally, morally, and for the livelihood of artistic creative people. So I thought that was really interesting, but that was just kind of one scene within this whole book. And there were many other kind of snippets of like great commentary. It just didn't feel very cohesive to me or like something that I could really get into, which again is unfortunate. So by the end of this book, I just felt really disconnected and really wasn't caring about what was happening to the characters, despite it feeling very high stakes and having interesting technology at the core of it. I just wasn't interested in how it all turned out. So unfortunately, I'm landing at 2 stars for this book. And I think I'm finding out that literary type horror, literary sci-fi is just not for me because this felt similar actually to Death of the Author, which I read obviously earlier in this video. This book felt really similar to that. Like I should have enjoyed it, but I just didn't. Something with the writing style just didn't connect with me. So that's unfortunate, but maybe could go as a recommendation. If you did like Death of the Author, for example, and this one also sounds interesting to you, then you actually might enjoy both. But for me, it did not work out. However, I did have another unexpected success with the next book I picked up, which was American Rapture. And this is another horror book, another kind of sci-fi horror book that has really strong religious undertones to it. Not even undertones, like very explicit overtones. I guess this is like a religious horror book. And it has a very intriguing setup and premise. We basically follow this main character who is a teenager, high school age approximately, and she has been raised to be very religious. She's Catholic, and very, very sheltered. And at the very beginning of this book, we learn that there is this new virus outbreak happening around her, that when people are infected, it causes them to basically go crazy, try to kill everyone around them, and also have sexual urges that they take out on everyone around them. So it's very graphic in describing these instances when infected people attack the people around them. So that's definitely the very strong horror element to it. It's very gory, very graphic, and very, again, sexual in nature. So if that's going to bother you, don't pick it up. But this main character, in learning about what's going on for the first time, she's also discovering that her parents have hid so much from her that actually is putting her in a lot of danger, because she doesn't know what's happening with this virus. She doesn't know that people have been talking about this for weeks before it actually hits her hometown in the news and on TikTok and in newspapers. She's not allowed to read any of that. She's not even allowed to check out fictional books that she wants to from the library unless they're pre-approved by her parent and the church. So very sheltered, and now very exposed and in danger with this virus on the loose. And ultimately, this book is a survival story of her just trying to survive, literally just stay alive in this condition, in this basically apocalyptic type situation. And I was surprisingly hooked by this book from page one. I really enjoyed being in this main character's mind. I think she's a very relatable main character, even though I personally don't have any religious trauma. I don't have a strong religious background. I think what she goes through in learning really rapidly what the real world is actually like outside of her bubble is still relatable to some extent to almost everybody, because everybody kind of goes through that period in their life where they're on their own for the first time and they're learning about things that they had no idea existed in the world. It just so happens that for her, it's like as abruptly and scarily as it could possibly happen. It's very much to the extreme. And yeah, I really enjoyed a lot of the commentary in here about religion. This book is pretty pointed in its stance. So if you are Catholic, Christian, and that's going to bother you to read strong criticism of the religion, then maybe take that into account before picking this up. But if you're interested in that and reading those criticisms, or you have religious trauma that you're recovering from, for example, I think you will enjoy what this book has to say, because there are some very strong, very poignant, relevant lines and passages in this book that I think will also make a lot of people feel very seen. And it comes in a highly action-packed, entertaining, horror, kind of end-of-the-world survival type of story. So I really enjoyed it. I was kind of surprised by it because I would not consider horror to be one of my favorite genres or a genre that I read a lot of, but a lot of this worked for me. And I do think religious themes in horror, mystery, thriller books are something I enjoy now that I am looking back on it. I've read, for example, Midnight is the Darkest Hour by Ashley Winstead, has a little bit of that. That was a 5-star book for me. Some of CJ Tudor's books, I'm thinking of The Burning Girls in specific, but she might have a couple of others that are kind of religious thrillers. And I think that one I gave 4 stars. So it does make sense in hindsight that this worked for me, but I'm very glad that that's the case. And I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I haven't really seen anybody talk about this book. This is the author of Mayfly, which is another horror book that came out 1 or 2 years ago that I remember so many people loving when it came out. I never did read that one, but because of that, I was excited to read her follow-up in this book, but also very surprised that I saw like nobody else review this book when it actually came out. So I'm here to say that I enjoyed it. And actually, as I've been reading this book on reading sprints, I have seen a number of people write in the comments that they also read and really enjoyed this book. So the positive reviews are already out there. I'm not saying I'm the first and only person to read this book and give it a good review. I'm just saying in my circles, I didn't see as much hype for it as I was expecting, and as I would expect now looking at the ratings that are out there, them being overall really positive. So yeah, would highly recommend this, but definitely content warnings around gore and graphic scenes. And there is a situation with a dog that's pretty traumatic, but definitely an intentional choice by the author, made evident by the author's note at the end, which does spoil some things, so don't read that until the end. But what happens to the dog is, again, intentional. So yeah, all right, that is that. So now I have 2 books left to read before I can close out this vlog. So I'm gonna get to it and hopefully be back soon with the final reviews. Okay, I am back with my final update for this video. I have finished the last 2 books and I'm excited to talk about them. Though my ratings might not reflect that, these last 2 books have been interesting. So first I'm going to talk about The Strange Case of Jane O by Karen Thompson Walker. I have not read any other books by this author. I know she's written one called, I think The Dreamers is her most popular one that I've heard of, and then it says also The Age of Miracles is her other book. This is a sci-fi book, kind of, though it takes quite a long time to get to any sort of sci-fi element. So actually I would more recommend this to fans of just general contemporary who like books that explore the topic of psychology and are interested in reading a book about a therapist and one of his clients and just really getting into their minds, and like a deep character study that goes into a sci-fi direction, but definitely doesn't lead with that. There's 2 perspectives. One is from the mind of a therapist, and then the other perspective is the mind of one of his clients or patients, whatever the right term is. She is coming to him because she has had recent episodes where she's had like short-term amnesia, or she's woken up in a strange location and can't remember like the 24 hours prior to waking up. So she's going to this therapist to figure it out. And so his perspective is him talking to her and trying to figure her out. And my experience reading this book was not super positive. I was really bored for a lot of this book, and it's a really short book. So that's kind of saying something when it feels that slow. Let's see, it's 271 pages and it felt slow. So I was pretty firmly set that I was gonna end up rating this book like 1 or 2 stars, depending on the ending, where I thought that if it had some sort of satisfying or redeeming ending, I'd bump it up to a 2. If it just stayed as a nothing burger, I was gonna land firmly as a 1 and not recommend this to anyone. And then I got to the ending, and even a little bit before the ending, I could tell what was going on, and what was happening at the end of this book is such an interesting concept. I wish it had been the entire book. Like, I wish it wasn't as much of a spoiler as it is to talk about the ending, because that's the most interesting part of the whole book. And I now want like a sequel just exploring that idea. And it's even consumed my thoughts so much, how much I've thought about like the end of this book and it as a sci-fi concept, that part of me is like, do I rate this a 3 stars? Do I rate this even a 4 stars? Because I think this was the intended experience the author wanted the reader to have. But my enjoyment of the book as I was reading it was so low, and my thoughts are that I really wouldn't recommend this book to anyone, because even the readers that I know would enjoy the concept in this book, I don't think this book does a good job of exploring that concept. So because of those reasons, I feel like I have to land at a 2 stars, but it is such a weirdly conflicting 2 stars. And I guess I want to talk to more people who have read this book. I know my friend Gwen has read this book. So Gwen, if you're watching this, send me a message. I would like to talk spoilers about this book. But also part of me wants to just spoil this book and put it in this video, because I feel like I'm so actively not recommending this book. I don't think people are necessarily going to pick it up, but I do think it's an interesting concept to discuss. So I'm just going to go for it. So spoiler warning here on the screen. Just mute me or fast forward until I'm past the spoilers if you really don't want to hear. But if you don't really have interest in reading this book, then I want to spoil it for you so that we can think about it together. So basically this book is about this main character, Jane O, who experiences dissociative fugues throughout her life, and they get kind of more and more serious. And what the therapist finds out is that she's actually slipping into alternate dimensions, like alternate realities. And in Jane's situation, she's slipping in and out of this world where a global pandemic has happened. So in the real world, in her normal timeline or universe, a pandemic was about to happen and it got contained, so everybody else is going on with normal life, but she keeps slipping into this reality where the pandemic has spread like crazy, and all kinds of things have happened in her life. I guess I'm talking in spoilers, so things happen like she loses her son, and then all of a sudden she'll slip back into her normal reality and she'll completely lose her memory of like doing that time space travel, I don't know. And the therapist, in kind of having this realization about her, does more research into this type of situation, and he starts studying other people who have had dissociative fugues, who then have come back and reported something else happening, or somebody has heard them say something. Like one was an atomic bomb or something happening that completely like set one course of humanity in a completely different direction. But that was in an alternate reality that this other person was kind of slipping between. Very interesting concept. I love the topic of alternate realities, and I love books and pieces of fictional media that explore that as a concept. And I feel like this book was so close, and it has a very unique kind of take on this theme and trope, but I just wish this book did it so much better. And so like I said, I'm curious to hear from anybody else who has read this book what your thoughts were and if your experience was similar to mine. But for everyone who I convinced not to pick this up with my very underwhelming review, yeah, I just wanted to share that it was that little piece of interesting concept, but really disappointing. So after all of that, I do think I am landing at 2 stars for this book. The reason it's a 2 instead of a 1 is because I find that concept really interesting, but really nothing about the writing of this book had me invested in these characters. Even emotionally, like when this main character has that situation where she loses her son in one of her realities, I wasn't emotionally invested enough to be sad about that. And that's really saying something, because things with children in books are definitely the thing that hits me the hardest. So I was missing that. But yeah, all right, 2 stars for that one. Let's move on to the final book that I read for this video, and that is Juny by Erin Crosby Eckstein. This is a historical fiction book set in, it doesn't say a year, Civil War looms, so mid 1800s, I guess. And we follow our main character, Juny, who is a young girl, and she is enslaved. And she's got a lot of interesting relationships with the people in her life. There is a girl who is the daughter of her owner, who is a white girl who Juny actually has a pretty good relationship with, and that's explored in this book. And then other characters are introduced. And then Juny is set on this kind of series of tasks after she meets the ghost of her sister. And while I liked Juny as a character, I am disappointed to say throughout this book I was pretty bored. This book also lost me pretty early on when it introduced that kind of paranormal element to it. I really don't enjoy historical fiction that includes paranormal elements, and it's not at all like horror feeling. I mean, it's horrific because we're following an enslaved girl, but it's not trying to be historical horror. It's just historical fiction with a paranormal speculative element to it. It kind of reminded me of The Reformatory by Tananarive Due, which is a book that I ultimately enjoyed, but not for the paranormal elements introduced. And also that one did have much more of a specific plot that I was invested in. This one just felt kind of meandering, pretty plotless, again, very character focused, and I'm someone who I just need a plot to latch onto. And I'm sad about that because historical fiction is a genre that I sometimes feel like I have to defend, or I feel instinctually defensive of, because I know a lot of people think it's boring, or they have the preconceived notion that it as a genre is boring. And often I find the opposite. I actually find a lot of historical events to be really interesting, and I find that historical fiction as a genre can be a lot more plot focused than it seems like it is, but this one unfortunately didn't match that sentiment. It was just too slow for my liking, and I unfortunately was just bored and disappointed when reading this book. So I sadly am also going to land at 2 stars for this book. And I was looking at Goodreads reviews though, and I am completely in the minority when it comes to my rating of this book. So if you're a fan of historical fiction, especially character focused historical fiction, then please go look at other people's reviews, look at the synopsis of this book, and determine for yourself whether you want to read it. I don't think I am the authority to say that people shouldn't read this book, unlike this one, which obviously I kind of said I don't really recommend it to anyone. This one I definitely do see has its audience, and I'm glad for that. Sadly, it just wasn't me. So landed at 2 stars. And so with that, I am very happy to be fully caught up with all of my Aardvark books, at least for the moment. I'm glad that I found at least a couple of winners through this video. I definitely am glad that I found Dissolution and rated it 5 stars, and then of course American Rapture giving it 4 stars. These are 2 books that I will definitely keep and I can see myself heavily recommending in the future, but I'm also glad that I gave a try to the other ones. Please let me know if you have read any of the books that I talked about in this video, and if you did, let me know your thoughts. Do we agree? Do we disagree? If you haven't read any of them, let me know if I convinced you to pick any of them up, or maybe skip any that you were thinking about before. And other than that, I don't think I have anything else. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in my next one.